This is Podco Media Networks.
It's the Innovation Podcast with Mark Reed Edwards and Garnett Harriman. Let's start the show.
Hi there, it's Mark Garnett. How are you doing?
Good. How are you doing?
I'm fabulous. It's a beautiful day here. We have this conversation all the time on the podcast. I think it's gorgeous here. It's like upper 50s, sun, and there are leaves everywhere in my backyard.
Nice. Do you have interns for like raking and stuff like this, or how does that work?
No, I'll have to talk to Dan, our guest, about getting interns for that stuff.
He's apparently really good at it.
So we've talked to a lot of people on this podcast, haven't we? But we've never talked to a fellow podcaster, as far as I can figure.
That's true.
Today, we're changing that today with Dan Kihanya. He's on, and Dan's specialties include early stage startup strategies, fundraising, lean startup process, product market fit, and customer growth. Among a long list of accomplishments, he's the co-founder and managing director of Impact Hub Bellevue and is the co-founder of mypoints.com. Plus, he hosts the great podcast called Founders Unfound. Dan, it's great to have you on.
Welcome.
Thank you so much. I'm very happy to be here.
Can you dig a bit more into your background and share your background and what you're up to these days?
Sure. I'm an entrepreneur, tried and true. I spent the last 25 years in the tech startup space. As you mentioned, I've helped to co-found a couple of entities. I've had 3 of my startups that I've been a co-founder of have exits, as they call, which means they either went public or somebody decided to buy them. And most of my career has been around digital experiences, mostly for the consumer. And the common thread for them all has been sort of this idea that you can take existing needs, existing experiences that customers have, and make them better, faster, cheaper, more personalized with digital, internet, networked platforms. And so my first company was MyPoints, which was an online loyalty program created during the original .com era. That company ended up going public in 1999. Then I worked on another media / loyalty program for the Indian market. And that company was bought by American Express. And then I worked on the mobile couponing space and helped pioneer how you basically connect up your phone with what you do in the grocery store. And that company was sold to a large company that essentially does traditional couponing. And then, as you mentioned, I helped to launch a co-working space here in the Seattle area where I live. And now I'm working on what they would call is a fintech, basically a mobile banking experience. Again, I kind of doubled down and went back to the Indian market. And we're building basically kind of a new generation of financial services and financial wealth and health management experience for millennials and zillennials in India. And so among all that, I'm an investor and an advisor and a mentor and try to help give back to the ecosystem as much as I can.
I want to ask you about being a mentor. What do you think is the secret to being a good mentor and being a good mentee?
Great question. Let's see. Well, I think from a mentor perspective, it's hard for me to evaluate myself. I try to get feedback from the mentees that I work with and the people I advise. But I think the times that I've seen the most, I guess, impact would be when I offer the cautionary tales. So people will come to me with, an idea, a question, a direction, a decision, and seek my advice. And rather than giving them sort of the answer, quote unquote, I'll give them, well, I tried to do it this way at one point, and this is what happened. Or I've seen and talked to others who've tried to do it this way or that way, and this is what happened with them. Doesn't necessarily mean that will happen to you, good or bad. So not directing, I think, is pretty important, and being more guiding. I know that's a subtle difference, but kind of leading people to make the decisions themselves is pretty important, I think, in any sort of mentor-mentee relationship. And then asking a lot of questions and trying to be as unbiased as possible. And I'm very deliberate about making sure my investor hat and my mentor hat are two different hats. So I try to provide as much feedback to mentees as if I am not necessarily the person that they are going to be pitching, selling, trying to interview with, but also trying to give those perspectives. And then I think from the mentee perspective, I think it's just about being open to learning and humble and coachable, and but also having a North Star so that you know all this advice that I get that comes in from different places. Sometimes it's going to be exactly the opposite. So it'll be go left or go right. And so the ability to be mentored is going to really rely on, can you synthesize and analyze all of that? And then at the end of the day, say, this is where this advice lines up what I'm trying to do.
So it's kind of it's a two-way thing, right? Each side has to have kind of an open mind.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. I think it's really interesting to me because I see if you read Twitter, there's definitely some blowback against mentorship in the startup world. And I think it has more to do with sort of the personas of mentors who are really kind of vendors in mentor clothing. So they're trying to sell you something at the end of the day, or people that sort of feel like I am the wise sage on the top of the mountain and you just come sit at my feet and let me distribute my pearls of wisdom to you.
Right.
And so I think those two personas sometimes soil the water a little bit. But you're absolutely right, Mark. The best experiences are when they're two-way. And I learn a ton from the people that I work with, for sure, about what's going on, how they think. I mean, I'm a little older than most of the folks that I talk to. And so generationally, what is it? How do they look at the world? And that can impact, obviously, my thinking as well.
Yeah. Someone asked me about the mentorship recently, and I said sometimes being a mentor is confused with cloning. You want to create another you rather than help the person you're mentoring become themselves. And to me, that's an important part of it that is sometimes forgotten.
Absolutely. Agree 100%.
Man, I had no idea I was on the podcast with such wise people. That's really deep stuff. Honestly,
but boy, it's really important, and everything that the three of us do is, a lot of it is working with other people, and whether that's a mentor-mentee relationship or just having an open mind to an idea, it's so important to go into something with an open mind.
It's amazing to me, actually, to watch Twitter sometimes. And I see folks that are sort of, if I've run a marathon in my career, they're on like mile 3, but they're sharing with the people at mile 1. And it's amazing to me to watch because it's so refreshing because, my generation is much more like heads down, do your own thing, your own bootstraps, and just sort of, if people are going to help you, take the help, but just keep going. So I really like that it's more collaborative and more, this idea of mentorship is not just somebody who's 60 years old and somebody who's 20 years old, right? If you're one step farther in the journey than I am, there's going to be some insights that you have, right? And so I think it's really refreshing. That's one refreshing aspect of mentorship that I'm starting to see, is that it's not about sort of like, oh yeah, you did 40 years of this and now you're retired and you take coffees with people. It's much more intentional than that, which is great.
Yeah, I mean, someone in their 20s can teach me something about, social media marketing, and mentor me in that area rather than the inverse.
Hey, didn't someone in their 20s basically introduce you to Dan Kihanya in the first place?
I think so.
There you go. There you go. They're great connectors. They definitely, people, I don't want to talk about they and them and we, but people in that generation who have embraced social media and sort of the connective tissue of connecting people and figuring out, oh yeah, this person can talk to that person about this. They have advanced degrees in that over me. And, I'm still in elementary school and that stuff.
Yeah. So I want to talk about your podcast. It's funny talking about a podcast on a podcast, but this is kind of
a little meta.
Yeah, I was just going to say meta. That's your word. I saved it for you.
Okay.
Can you tell us about Founders Unfound and the issues you deal with on it?
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm really excited about it. It was kind of a passion project over the last couple of years, but one of the things I did a couple of
Please
years
start with
ago,
the title. Please start with the title because the title throws me off constantly. So,
Founders Unfound.
which means what?
So the title essentially means, and this has kind of evolved, so it's a good question, but initially it was the fact that I started the podcast to identify the fact that there are so few underrepresented background founders that are getting funded, but they're out there. So it's not like they don't exist. It's just that they aren't tracking in this, sort of channel that results in venture funding. And so hence the idea that they're not found. Right. And so,
Now I get it. Okay.
yeah, yeah. But we've had lots of talks with my little group that we work on this, and the brand is evolving a little bit into kind of underdog-ish status.
I like that.
And so we had discussions about should we be going for more high profile guests, right? Who represent groups that are traditionally underrepresented. So there are some people that are really making some big splashes. And after thinking about it, I said, no, right? Even though that would benefit the podcast tremendously, I want to be the voice for the folks that don't have the voice, that don't get the spotlight. And
good on you.
if that changes from a profile point of view, then we will adjust accordingly. But I think that as an entrepreneur in particular, these are the business warriors of our day because they make tremendous sacrifices. They have constantly in their face naysayers telling them why it won't work, why they're doing won't be the way that things get solved, or they aren't the right people to do it. And so it's a tremendously challenging time. And so I want to be on that side of supportiveness. And so the original idea essentially was, how can we provide some sort of highlight or spotlight on the fact that there are folks from underrepresented backgrounds that are taking on big opportunities, trying to solve big enough problems that can really be in consideration for venture capital. They're scalable, tech enabled, and so forth. Because I was kind of tired of hearing that, sort of missive about there isn't a pipeline. And so I said, I'm going to show, and the original goal was, let's see if we can get to 50 or 100 interviews and show that there's definitely a lot of folks out there. And so that was the original idea. I was going to do a blog, and then everybody said, who I socialized the idea with, hey, Dan, this is the 21st century. So, come on, man. So I had to spend a lot of time last year kind of what's a microphone and, what's an RSS feed and how does this work? And then we kind of hit the ground running this year. And we've decided to not boil the ocean and just, kind of be deliberate and intentional and focused. So we're just doing founders of African descent this year. So you could be an African American or self-identified Afro-Caribbean or from the continent. And we've had really, really great guests. And so I've been super excited about the way it's grown.
How many episodes so far?
We've done 20. I do have other things going on. So I wanted to be consistent because I figured out that's one of the big things of podcasting is you got to be consistent. So I said, what's the pace that I can keep consistent on? And it's twice a month. And so we do long form conversations intentionally because we're trying to do storytelling.
Nice. I've met at least one of your guests, right? Kurt.
Yes, he'll be a guest upcoming in November. Yeah. Yep. Yeah. We've had some amazing folks that, we've had people from different industries, health tech and commerce. We've had some legit like hardware, like real science type folks, people in HR and recruiting, people who are working on stuff in social media and the kind of influencer content world. So we've had a really good array because that's one of the other things that people say is aren't Black founders just focused on sort of Black consumer issues, so to speak, right? And that's definitely not the case, right? And not that that's an unwarranted market or that's an undeserving market to find solutions for. And in some cases, those are pretty big opportunities.
Yeah.
But folks are working on all the things that everyone else in startup land are working on.
And it's not limited to the Northwest, right? You're getting folks from all over the country and maybe all over the world.
All over the world. Yes. We don't limit entrepreneurship, despite, I guess, the proclamations of certain areas of this country is not geographically constrained. And so, yeah, so we've had folks from Silicon Valley, from Seattle, from LA, Atlanta. Our last episode, person was in Pittsburgh. So, and we've had one of our founders who's in Nigeria and from Nigeria, obviously. So, yeah, so we're not limiting, definitely not limiting regionally. We do focus on the stage, though. I will say they're early. So it's usually somebody who hasn't raised a lot of money. Again, kind of fits the theme.
Pre-seed, seed.
Yes. Yeah. And, but has some traction. They're either been around a little bit, or they have a product in the market, or they're starting to zero in on product market fit. So that's our sweet spot.
Funniest or strangest moment, any of your 20 episodes, by way of commiseration?
We'll compare notes. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, there's always the technical stuff, right? So you use the same platform that I do. And I don't know, it was 4 or 5 episodes in before I bothered to check. And somebody brought up to me that this particular platform doesn't work on this particular browser. And so I had to go and download it because the person wasn't coming on. And you know how that is with guests. Sometimes you're like, maybe they're running late, or maybe they forgot about it, or the link didn't work. And he came on and he said, yeah, sorry, Dan, it doesn't work with my browser. So I had to download Chrome, and then that took a while. And then I had to set up my mic or my headphones. And so, there's those usual things. And also just sort of the, with guests, like, yeah, if you're eating your breakfast while we're talking, that's going to be hard to edit out. So maybe if you don't mind. So there's always those kinds of things that happen with podcasting. I mean, I try to be as deferential and respect the time of the guest as possible. But I also tell them, I want you to sound good. It's only one time I actually had to tell the person, I think they were like in their car in a parking garage. And I was like, we need to reschedule. I can't hear you. And I do not have the editing capability to take away all of that background noise and make you sound good. And he was like, yeah, okay, I get it. Yeah, let's reschedule. And he was willing to do that. And I'm amazed, from a content conversation point of view, just what people bring up. And it's amazing to me.
As in inappropriate or like, or enriching? I'm not sure which way you're going with it, but
yeah, it's not inappropriate. It's more
because I get a lot of complaints about that.
Oh, really?
mostly from Mark.
Yeah.
I thought being his co-host would give me a hall pass. Apparently not.
Well, I'm pretty slavish about the, I don't want to be the explicit tag. So even if somebody drops a cuss in there or whatever, I'll probably take it out. And I try pretty hard not to do it myself. But
we got screwed on that one, Mark, right from the get-go, right?
Yep.
I may change my tune because everybody's in this land of digital media. There's no board of like censorship.
What's really funny, I think, with if you want to call them curse words, that they have entered politics now. Politicians are using the F word on Twitter and in public in ways that they never did in the past, certainly not in public. So it's almost like been mainstreamed.
There you go.
I think so. And it's always interesting when somebody's like giving a speech or a presentation, and it's not a casual conversation, and they drop it, and then people start to cheer, as if I think it's like this. It connotes like you're so emotional, you're so passionate about whatever you're saying that you're willing to
authentic. Hello,
to do
authentic.
that. Yeah. I mean, some people talk like that, right? I mean, just every other word is just the way they talk. Right? I grew up with folks like that.
There you go.
But I think, what's interesting, the surprising thing for me is just the journeys, that we have so many amazing journeys. And that's really what we're trying to showcase, is that the attributes of a good entrepreneur are not defined by necessarily where you went to school or your pedigree or even your career. It's the some of that journey. Where's the resilience had to show up? Where's the wipe yourself off, get up and get back at it. And so, we've had people who were homeless. We've had people who were kind of high level, like world-class athletes who had that all go away, which, can happen pretty instantly, and had to think about, what do I do next? And just lots of interesting dynamics of growing up as an immigrant and, having to navigate different societal constraints that come with that, or challenges. And just so, to me, it's been amazing just to hear just how varied and rich the stories are.
And that's what it's all about. That storytelling that helps to dispel this crazy ass myth about the pipeline problem, right? I mean, hopefully humanizing it helps people deal with their own pattern biases would help you. So, we'll see, right? Because still early in that game, it feels like. So I want to get back to a quick comment that you made about mentorship, and it was a great question by Mark. So you made a reference to the blowback about mentorship. Was that a part of the whole, is that part of the racial inequity piece, or is that in general? I feel like mentorship is kind of a overused term, but it definitely gets a lot of negative feedback in the context of Black or brown or female entrepreneurs relative to the folks who are ostensibly trying to help.
Right. Well, I think it is both, but certainly, yeah, Monique Woodard coined the phrase, right? Like Black entrepreneurs and Black founders are over-mentored and underfunded, right?
That's what I was thinking of, yeah.
Right.
That's the phrase I was thinking of.
Yeah. And so that's definitely, I think my analysis is around that persona issue, and also sort of maybe the dismissal, right? Like, if you would write a check to this person if they had a different skin tone, and instead you want to mentor them, then that's a fair call out, right? I mean, if that's legitimately what's happening. But I do think mentorship is important, and I'm hoping that the baby doesn't get thrown out with the bathwater. And frankly, for me, as a founder of color with experience, I have relatively somewhat unique perspectives that are going to be different than, you have, I don't know, whoever, Mark Zuckerberg or somebody else as a potential mentor. And so I do worry a little bit, but I do think a lot of it is because of, what Monique's pointing out, is that there's a sort of a different level of basically bridging, like, can this person do it? And if I don't have any sort of going in sort of, belief in that, then it's like, well, maybe I can imprint on them, get to know them, and then both I will be more comfortable, and I'll also believe that they're, taking my advice, and which, again, is a little problematic if there's bias that's helping you draw that conclusion and take that course.
Yeah. On your podcast, do you talk openly about the lack of VC for folks of color? How deep do you get into that? Or are you just, in order to keep the storytelling upbeat and optimistic, you're basically looking past that, like a great running back running for daylight?
No, it's the reality that they all face. So yeah, we take it on. It's an interesting topic because you have to be careful, right? I mean, especially if people are in the middle of fundraising or about to fundraise, they're legitimately this is going to be available for an investor to listen to. And so they have to be conscious about how are they going to look at an investor who's listened to what we're talking about, right? And for some people, they're like, bring it on, let's go, I'll keep it real. And other people are a little more hesitant, but everybody is willing to talk somewhat about their fundraising experience. I don't necessarily couch it as, tell me all the bad stuff that happened to you as a Black founder when you're raising money, right? But it comes up, and so I'll ask a question that's more open-ended about how are you reminded day to day that you are a Black founder, right? And that can run the gamut from how customers receive you, how the media treats you, how your neighbor treats you, I mean, as well as investors. We break the podcast into kind of three pieces. The first is their story. And to me, the founder story is more than just where did you go to college and what did you do before you founded your company. It's the whole gamut of growing up, and because it reveals a lot of insights about who they are and their journey.
Sure.
Then we talk about the company, obviously, what's going on with it. We don't delve in as much as other startup podcasts do, because there's opportunities for hopefully people to go on other shows and do that. But we want to give the context of what it is they're doing, where did the idea come from, what's the origin story, and then where is it now and where's it going. And then the last third of the podcast is usually around some of these kinds of things. So what's it like to be a Black founder? What's fundraising like? What advice do you have for others? I do try to interject some positivities. I ask, like, who's been helpful for you in your journey? Are there organizations or allies or mentors or that have helped catalyze you forward? And so we do get into that. And, if you listen to my first podcast with Stella Shalu, and I'm terrible at it because it was my first one. So it's not the best podcast from a quality point of view, but she brings it hard. I mean, talking about an investor who, said, why don't you basically go on government assistance to subsidize your startup until you can raise money? And I had to stop in the middle of the conversation, like, is that really what they said? And I'm paraphrasing a little bit, but that was the gist of it. And so we've had lots of discussions about that. And again, I defer to the comfort level and the, sort of willingness to dive deep to the guest, so that I always want to make sure, my podcast is not 60 minutes, kind of hard hitting, like, tell me why, tell me this. And so it's ultimately, I view the founder as my prime constituent, right? They're my customer and I want them to be happy. And so if they want to share that, they want to have a forum to bring the heat, I say, I'm going to let you do it, right? And at the same time, I'm not going to push if that's not where you want to go, or you're feeling like that's not what you want to talk about.
What do you think is behind the curious lack of hard data about VC funding for Black and Brown in particular? So relatively dearth. There's a dearth hard data, and the data that's available seems to be getting worse.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think sort of, obviously 2020 is we're going to look back as it's an inflection point from a social societal point of view. And that's obviously permeating into business and into the entrepreneurial realm. So I think, pre-2020, I think a lot of it was just ignoring it. Sort of also the myth of sort of like meritocracy and sort of like, does that matter? Should we even ask that question? Right? It's like, we can dissect the DNA of an entrepreneur every other way. Are they tall? Are they short? Are they good looking? Did they go to a good school? Are they left-handed? Are they right-handed? What's their favorite color? Right? We can dissect all that, but it was kind of viewed like, oh, well, that shouldn't matter. And so I think a lot of it was just the questions weren't asked, or not on the form. And then I think as people started to think, well, maybe we should ask that, then it became sort of this uncomfortable dance, like, should we ask that? And will people be offended if we ask that? And then do people want to even, if you give them like no comment or don't want to say or whatever, will people just check that? So I think we're in a little bit of that stage of sort of how do you judge that? How do you measure that? Right. And so I think that's part of it.
So you think we're past the point where essentially the linkage between measuring and accountability, was historically washed away? Are you feeling like people understand that accountability comes from measuring, or? Because I'm confused, to be honest, because I feel like there's a lot of talk and a lot of like apparently new data that seems to be available, but it's not clear that the linkage between the measurement and accountability is actually there. Or maybe it is, and that's why it was never there. I don't know. I'm confused. I'm just a brown person. What do I know?
Yeah, no, I think you're right. Here's how I view it, right? I don't have high blood pressure, but if I went to the doctor for my physical and the doctor said, you have high blood pressure. Okay. And I have actually historically pretty low blood pressure. So if I had high blood pressure, it'd probably be something big deal, right? So I think people now know they have high blood pressure, right? But so then what do you do about that? So I think that's the definite difference, is that they no longer in the dark about the fact that they have high blood pressure. So what are you going to do about high blood pressure? Obviously, diet, there's exercise, there's medications, there's meditation. I mean, there's all kinds of things that you can do to try and address high blood pressure. And then obviously, to figure out if you're making an impact on that, you're going to have to go back to the doctor and have them once again take your blood pressure, right? Or maybe you have some fancy new Apple 15 watch or something that takes it every day, right? And so the measurability and the accountability and the intentionality is still very much in its early stages. I would agree with you 100%. But I think the difference is that they know they have high blood pressure now, that they know that this is not trivial, it's not easy, and it does exist. There is a problem.
Yeah, it's like a 12-step program, kind of.
Yeah, there you go, right? Yeah, awareness and coming out of denial, I guess, right? Denial is the big thing. Yeah. So I agree with you, Garnett. I think we got a long way to go, for sure.
At least we're on the path. So we'll see. Hopefully the body politic doesn't croak from hypertension beforehand.
Yeah, this is an incredible year of, just the pandemic and the social unrest. And then, you have all the, whether you believe it's climate induced or not, these fires and hurricanes, and just, it's relentless. This is just a relentless year of just battering us as people. But I made these t-shirts when COVID, sort of started to ramp up, that we used to kind of do a little fundraiser on a podcast. And it said basically humanity over calamity. And, nice. Individuals and societies and countries and peoples have definitely been impacted across the span of time of history. But humanity is undefeated, right? We haven't been wiped out quite yet. So I'm a believer and an optimist. And I think if we can come together, which is not trivial these days, but come together around our common progress, I'm looking forward to 2021 and beyond.
You have any more of those t-shirts?
Absolutely. I'll send you guys one.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Hey, I'm paying my way. So
you can just go to our store. We have a store on our website, foundersunfound.com. And
I'll try to do that today, actually. Does it come in really like fashionable colors, or is it like a white t-shirt?
It's black with blue letters, but because that felt like the UN kind of neutral to me. But
there you go.
Our brand colors are kind of slate gray with green and white and black. But I thought I'd change it up. But if you want a pink or a camo, or I can figure out how to make those if you want. Just let me know.
I have a vast collection of pink t-shirts, starting with my pink Harlem t-shirt.
Nice. I only have one or two in my wardrobe, I think. But this time of the year with Breast Cancer Awareness Month, I mean, they seem to come out in droves.
For me, it's more it's kind of my watermelon strategy. I very frequently wear pink and green together.
Ah, nice. You have a uniform. I've always thought about what could be my uniform? These people who wear cowboy shirts or red shoes all the time. And it's like, I'm not that stylish, so I can't figure it out.
Personal branding. Mine is watermelon.
I like it.
I'd forget about it on day 2, and I'd wear the wrong clothes. It's like, remember to wear my Fitbit. I can't do that. So how am I supposed to remember to wear the right color sneakers?
We had William on recently, from Aperture, and I was waxing prosaic about my watermelon strategy with William, and he did one of those sort of covered his head in shame type moves on the video portion. He's like, I can't believe that guy's my business partner.
I love it. Hey, this is America, and if that's who you are, then wear proud.
Watermelon. Yep.
People will remember it. That's for sure.
That they will.
Hey, can we talk a little bit about Wisely? I'm super interested in your latest, and then maybe one other quick question, and I'm going to kick it back to Mark after that.
Sure. Yeah. So Wisely is the name of the company in India. So I mentioned that, 15 years ago, I had another startup, and my partner there is still in India, in Bangalore, and he actually ran that other company before it got bought by American Express, and then worked for them for a couple of years to integrate it. And then a couple years ago, he kind of came off that and was, kind of getting bored and said, "Hey, Dan, let's do it again." And I said, "Okay, well, if you can come up with the right thing, let's do something big." And this is 2015 into 2016. And at the time, India was obviously emerging as a tremendous marketplace. And, there's 1.3 billion people, and almost any way you slice a segment ends up being like 30, 40, 50 million people minimum, right? And
That's
so
a lot of brown folks.
there are, yeah. And so there was this interesting confluence of three things that was happening. One was the regulations were opening up. And for those who don't remember, but basically right around the Donald Trump election, coincidentally, India did this demonetization to try and eliminate.
I remember that. Was that the thing where they're pulling currency out of the money supply?
Yeah.
Was it that? And people were up in arms. I just remember reading just a very little bit about it.
It was a big deal. Yeah,
Deal, right?
There was a cash scare, and it was basically what happened was people. So think about like if we had $1,000 bill in the United States. You don't keep $1,000 bill to go to 7-Eleven or pay for your gas, right? If you have $1,000 bill, you're paying somebody a lot of money for something that you don't want tracked. And so the hypothesis was that all the money in these currencies, these high, level currencies, are used for corruption and black market stuff. And so it's like, if I want to buy a house and I want to bid on it, I'll make my bid and then I'll take a handful of these currencies and I'll hand it to the person sort of on the side and say, make sure my bid wins.
Yep.
And so they were trying to eliminate that.
Long history in India of that, by the way.
Yeah.
Long history.
And so
especially with foreign currency too, right? So
yeah, absolutely. And so they created this big scare of like people thought they didn't understand, like, is it just, what is it? And so there was this run on all the ATMs, and so they were all depleted. And then people were like, how do I get money? Because it's still very much a physical cash society. So anyway, so that was part of this series of regulatory activity. And on the sort of digital side and the banking side, they started to open up things that allowed for sort of the tech stack to come in and do some interesting things. That was the second thing, which is that the maturity of fintech, the actual core tech, was scalable. You didn't have to invent a lot of new things to do that. And then the third thing that we identified, which was really the market insight, was if you are a millennial or a zillennial in India, you have this interesting tension, which is savings is a tremendously heavy cultural aspect of being an Indian, and it's taught generation to generation. And so there's an inherent desire to be prudent and be a saver. At the same time, you have this conflict of being a millennial or a zillennial, which is, I want to live my life. I want to experience life. I'm not going to wait 40 years to travel. I'm not going to eat, the equivalent of ramen noodles every day just so I can go on vacation once a year, right? And so there's this tension of how can I be, there's a great Aesop's fable that they like in India about the grasshopper and the ants. And the ants are very judicious and they're saving up all the stuff during the summer. And the grasshopper's like, hey, just chill out. And then the winter comes and the ants are inside and they're loving life. And the grasshopper's like, let me in, please. I know I should have listened to you. And so we're trying to help people be ant hoppers. How can you do both? And so we saw that opportunity and we said, okay, with technology, regulations, and market, there's an opportunity to come in here. And so we focus on the folks that are really underserved from a sort of guidance perspective. And so if you're sort of like coming out of college and you're not quite 26, 27, that's a tremendously underserved market. And in terms of, more proactively helping them sort of take those first steps to, understanding investing and insurance and credit and how do you save money? Many of our customers tell us, before I use Wisely, basically, I make more money than my parents ever made, but every month the bank account's empty. And I just perplexed me, and they're like, okay, well, we'll help you with that. And so that's what we've been doing. We spent the last 2-3 years trying to build that. And it's been an interesting journey of figuring out kind of the product market alignment. And we've only raised a little bit of money. So cranking along. And even with COVID, I think it's been interesting. we didn't have to do a ton of layoffs or anything, but we did tighten the belts and
Nice.
reduce some salaries. And there was an initial blowback, I should say, or I should say, kind of retrenchment of the consumer, like literally like, I'm just keeping my money under the mattress. I don't know if I'm going to have a job tomorrow. I don't know if I'm going to have to pay for medicine or to go to the doctor if I get COVID. But as that sort of eased up, then we're not in an industry where like travel or events and things where we were, sort of direly hit by COVID. People still need to figure out what to do with whatever money they have. And so that's where we've been able to show up.
Hey, is this new company involved with Amex in any way because of that legacy relationship with the previous company that was sold, or?
Not at this point, nothing public, but we certainly have that heritage and relationship that is available to us. And also we work with one of the bigger banks there, because in India, you have to have sort of the licensing entity who handles money. And
which one is it? Is it ICICI, whatever? That one?
Yeah.
With all the C's and the I's?
Right, exactly. Yeah, they're one of the largest private banks.
Nice.
India has state-run banks and private banks. And so it's one of the larger private banks. And we work with them on the last project as well.
Nice. So one last question. It feels like at this moment in the U.S., there are a lot of calls for revamping certain aspects of the financial system, especially those aspects that touch Black culture more than others. So you get things like Robert Smith talking about the capillary banking system and talking about what happens when corporations put money off of their balance sheet into Black banks and CDFIs and capillary banking institutions. I feel like embedded in that also is this like call to action for, well, frankly, folks like yourself to maybe exercise more of that investor muscle versus the entrepreneur muscle and do things like start a fund. Are you thinking about that, or?
Yeah, actually I am. And, I think we've had a couple conversations about that. I think one of the things that over the last few months for me, this is October 2020, has been sort of this call to be more of an influencer than I have been. And so I'm actually considering, how do I become more impactful as an investor, whether that's investing my own money or joining a fund or starting a fund. Because I think what I've noticed is that the financial world is slow moving, sort of deliberately paced. And I think that's probably a reaction to some of the seasons when things were kind of go and things got out of control. And so they tend to be more conservative in the progress they make. And even though there's more attention to spotlighting places to invest across all the asset classes, whether that's startups or the banking community, the small business world, there's still not as much activity. And so I think as an entrepreneur, I'm always of the perspective, if there's a problem that needs to be solved and the players, the usual suspects who could solve it either can't because they already have the current solution and that's a cash cow for them and they're not going to disrupt it. Or by definition, nobody owns all innovation. And so they're not doing it. And so starting a fund, if I did it, would be more of a perspective of, is there a way I can do it that isn't being done today? Not just be, sort of another person who puts VC next to some .vc next to some URL. And so what would that mean? And so I'm sorting that out. When you start a fund, you have to have an investment thesis, as they say. And so, but I do have a commitment and I guess I'm saying it on air here. So to wanting to be much more impactful in that regard. I do believe in what Robert Smith is advocating. I do think that's material. I love the analogy of Monopoly. I mean, I didn't come up with this, right? But people talk about this analogy, right? It's like if you're playing Monopoly, right? Let's say the three of us are playing and hopefully most people know what the game of Monopoly is, right? You roll the dice, you move around the board, you buy properties, and then people who land on your properties have to pay you rent and so forth. And so if we play for a half an hour and bought up a bunch of properties and started putting houses and hotels and charging each other in rent, and then we invited a fourth person to play right then. Obviously, that person is going to be tremendously disadvantaged, right? They have no properties. Nice.
Garnett was holding up something on the video. So describe it, Garnett.
it's me wearing an ascot and like a safari jacket from this property we used to own up in the Hudson Valley, with a dog peeking over my lap onto the Monopoly board. And I've got like 30 houses on the board and like a pile of cash next to the dog.
Nice.
And I'm trying to figure out how to screw the person to my left.
Yeah. We'll put that in the show notes. Send it to me, Garnett.
I love that. Yeah. I played a lot of Monopoly when I was a kid, and my parents stopped playing with me because they got tired of me winning. and winning, it is one of those games where it's just, you got to be ruthless. And
That's it.
But anyway, if we brought in a fourth person, that person would be at a pretty clear disadvantage. So we could decide, let's just take advantage of them. They'll be in the game for about 10 minutes and take all their money and they'll be out. Or we could say, let's figure out a way to make it interesting for that person to be on board and for them to be in the game for us. And so we would have to reset somehow. Like maybe we each give them a property, or maybe we take all of our houses and hotels off and we start from scratch on that. And so that level setting is what really needs to happen. The challenge we have, though, is that people start to use things like, oh, isn't that reverse racism? And, isn't that blowing up this myth of like anybody who's good should get the quote unquote job? And so that's the tough part of the discussion right now. But I believe there needs to be a level setting. There's been so much disadvantage built into the journey. And so it's okay that the lens, if you want to use the term unfairly, it's really fairly is aimed at certain folks for a while.
Well said.
Yeah, that's great. I go back to your T-shirt, Humanity Over Calamity, approaching life with that as your philosophy is going to make for a much more fruitful life, I think.
Yeah, we're all in it together. At the end of the day, I spent a lot of time when my son was going through puberty about this rite of passage. My dad is from Kenya, and he had to go through the whole, well, I won't get into it on the podcast, but it's a pretty interesting experience for manhood, rite of passage there. And I began to think about how we miss that. We don't really have that in the US unless you come from, a heritage where that was retained, right? And so I tried to be deliberate. So I did a lot of reading about it. But one of the big things that a lot of young people miss is this idea of working on something bigger than yourself and building the muscle of like having a passion around something that isn't just about your own self-interest. And I think sometimes we get caught up in that as a society. It's like, why am I being overlooked? Why am I not getting the credit? And if I feel like that's the potential path I could end up on, I'm going to be more of a clawing and just really tightly grasping on what I get, quote unquote, right? And so, I think humanity is about, can we look out for each other, and that's one of the things I think is great about the military. Not that I'm a war hawk or anything, but this idea that you're willing to sacrifice yourself for the person next to you, and they're not your brother, they're not your cousin, you didn't necessarily grow up with them, they're not your best friend, or at least they haven't been for a long time. And I think, we need as much of that as we can get into our society. And so I try to live my life that way and give back as much as I can. And hopefully that echoes across to other folks.
So your life philosophy can be summed up in Monopoly and Band of Brothers, basically.
There we go. Yeah, I like that. I like that. Absolutely. Awesome. I am left-handed, by the way. And so I do think that also introduces another perspective. The world is pretty biased against us. The word in Latin for left-handed is sinestro, right?
Sinister, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I
So-
think it's a justifiable bias because, left-handers are so disproportionately successful and in everything that they do. That's the only way to get a level setting. Thank you.
Okay, there you go.
I'm right-handed, so I feel like
Are you left-footed, Dan, too?
No, I'm right-footed.
Oh, that's funny
there you
because,
go.
A left-footed punter in the NFL is a rare commodity, but they're prized because they spin the ball in a different direction and it's unexpected. And I think maybe that's, left-handers in general come at things from a different angle. I was kind of ambidextrous when I was a kid, but I got pushed into being a right-handed person. And so anyway, who knows?
My grandfather was left-handed. It's really only in all of our families, it's me, him, and my daughter. And, he was born in 1909. And so when he grew up, they would literally hit his hand with the ruler when he was using his left hand, and kept him out of the Army because they wouldn't let you shoot. Those old bolt actions. You can't be on the left side next to somebody on the right side because you'd be going off in their ear. But
like Phil Mickelson is a left-handed golfer who's naturally right-handed, and the reason he became a left-handed golfer is he copied his dad, so that the reflection of his dad was how he learned how to play. It's just really kind of funny how people kind of adjust to their conditions,
Yeah, I'm a left-handed golfer, by the way, and a left-handed batter, and right-handed everything else.
Fascinating. That's interesting.
That's bizarre.
Aside from being right-footed, I've always been left-handed, and I keep threatening my wife I'm going to learn guitar when the kids are out of the house, and I refuse to buy a right-handed strung guitar. I'm going to buy a left-handed strung guitar and force myself to learn it that way.
You can get that.
It worked for Jimi Hendrix and Paul McCartney, and
there you go.
So,
see what I mean about disproportionately successful? That's the advantage.
Yeah, exactly.
That's not fair. That's not meritocratic. I'm sorry, man.
Well, you seem to work it out.
Well, Dan, this has been a great discussion. Really, thanks for being with us.
Thanks,
I
Dan.
appreciate it. It's been awesome. Thank you so much, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining Garnett and Mark on the Innovation Podcast. Visit theinnovationpodcast.co to subscribe and listen to other episodes.